Good morning, everyone. What questions about Genesis do you have? So, do we know who wrote Genesis? No, we don't. Is it a group effort? Most scholars think it to some degree of a group effort, yes. Yep, that's right. That's right. Any other questions? All right, so let's start, and then we'll do, remember, in chapter 3, verse 1. Last week we were talking about the serpent, and the serpent is this creature in the ancient world who would, and depending on your context, would be seen as a wise creature. It's also some eternity because it shreds, but also can be a design, a creature that evokes chaos. This chaos creature, he says it's an animal that God created of all God's animals. And of all the God's animals, he's shrewd or cunning. And then we spent the rest of the time talking about Satan. And then, so do you have any questions about Satan before we move on? And go back to the text? Okay. Okay, so back to the text itself, since the text says nothing about the devil or Satan, I'm not going to bring it up. And frankly, I think people who talk about Satan here, in fact, uh, really take this text off course because the point is not about Satan. Never says that. There's no character of that. This, if you're talking to an ancient person and you thought of an animal that might be cunning or shrewd, they're going to say, of course it was the serpent. Of course it was a snake-like figure. Of course it was. And that's why he's considered clever and so forth. I brought this up last time, and I think this matters to bring it up again. There's a word play in Hebrew between the word naked, adumim, in 225, and shrewd, which is arum, in 3:1. The point seems to be that that's the exact opposite. While they're naked, they're naive. He's shrewd. Aduim versus adum, and that's about to change, and that's the whole point. And so it's a pun. It's a word play. Now, of course, what happens here at the end of chapter, or the beginning of this, but the end of that section, so I'll start around verse 4, 3, 4. The serpent said to the woman, it literally says in Greek, it literally says, Hebrew, not surely you will die. Not, lomot, not surely you will die. For God knows that when you eat from your eyes will be open, you'll be like divine beings or gods who know good and evil. And so the serpent here violates something that the Jews would value later on, probably when they wrote this, frankly. In Deuteronomy 4:2 and 13:1, Deuteronomy, it says this. Moses pronounces this twice at the end of the Torah. You shall not add to the thing that I command you. You shall not take away from it. And so we have this Jewish principle. You don't add or take away from God's commandments. And so, again, if you're in their context, they don't have a church, but like their church meeting, their Jewish congregation, the point he's saying is that this serpent represents exactly what you do not do. What God said should be enough. And you don't go, he didn't say that. That's not exactly what he means. Now, again, the text here is in Hebrew, not, you shall surely die. Okay, so what exactly is going on here? Probably, this is where it's a little complicated because the Hebrew, I'm not a Hebrew specialist, but I can read Hebrew specialist. I took Hebrew for a while, but I trust them to say it's sometimes a bit complicated. But the expression, like we said a long time ago, well, I said a long time ago, of you will not die, when you look up that reference in Hebrew, every time it shows up in the Old Testament, almost every time, it means something along the lines of, you will deserve the death penalty. It's coming. You deserve to have capital punishment. And you can prove that by looking up every time it shows up in the Hebrew Bible. And that's how it's used. It's used in the sense of not, you're going to die on the spot, but rather, you deserve to die. You will have the punishment of capital punishment. You have the crime that deserves that. So here it probably means the same thing. So if I paraphrase it, I think Walton is right. So the point is that the serpent is saying it was never really God's intention to put them to death. It's not, surely you will die. The point being, don't think that death is such an immediate threat. He just said that to discourage you from eating that tree. Don't think Death's not an immediate threat. Don't worry about that. So, in effect, he's not contradicting God, technically speaking. He's suggesting there's nothing to worry about. No, the point isn't he's going to kill you, punish you. That's not the point. The point is he doesn't want you to get the benefits of that tree. That's what it really is he's trying to stop you from doing. He just doesn't want you to be like him and live where he lives in the divine realm. He doesn't want that. That's the problem. Don't worry about that threat. It's not so much he didn't threaten you to kill, or that is, that'd be a punishment, but rather, that's not the point. That's not the point. And that's why he's being cunning or shrewd. He's not flat out lying. He's saying, it's what my son says all the time to me about, or to his sister about his sister. David's dad's not going to punish you. You won't get grounded. You'll get whatever you want whenever you want it. I said, son, that's absolutely true. It's not true. But I know dad says that, but it's not going to happen. It does happen. But anyway, no, that'd be the same thing. Hey, don't worry. That's not. Well, that's cunning. So that's the point. No, don't you worry about that. Now, in verse 6, I'm going to move ahead. Let's see any questions about that or comments.
So it's like a slight misrepresentation.
A slight misrepresentation. That's how I see it. I think it's a slight yes, that's exactly how I see it. I do not think it's a bold-faced lie. It's just saying, no, you just don't get worked up about that. He doesn't, no, not surely you will die. That's not the point. He just don't want you to eat that tree and be like him. That's all. Yeah, that's exactly my reading. This is just like, Okay, can I go ahead? Anything else? Good question. Yes, ma'am?
Do you think there was a purpose for God to put that tree in the middle of the garden?
Do I think there was a purpose to put that tree in the middle of the garden? Well, I don't know if it's in the middle, but I do. I think the storyteller is trying to communicate, which I think I said several weeks ago. Sorry, it was a long time ago. I think the storyteller is trying to communicate, which he'll unpack more here in a second too, is a general theological principle that we see in different places of the Old Testament and the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible particularly, and that is God gives commandments, and God wants you to come to him to live life. And so the word for how to live life well or order your life well is wisdom. One way ancient Jews said wisdom or how to order your life well is the knowledge of good and evil. And so I think it's a way of saying God wants to give you wisdom. God wants to give it to you. So don't seek it apart from him. Don't seek to order life the way you want. Go to him. See, my view, and this is not novel, I do have the view of other scholars as well, that the point here is that the theologian who wrote this, or theologians who wrote this, is making the point probably eventually they could eat trees or do things God in his timing, in his way. He's just saying right now don't do that. You're not ready for that. And I think the assumption is they keep coming to God, and then he gives them wisdom, how to order life. You do your job, you're designed for something, but don't do that. So it's not, I do not think, this is usually how it's preached and taught, it's just a test. It's just something he knows that they'll want as I just want to test them humans. God's going to test you. And I don't think that's the point at all. I think rather it's to say, listen, I'll give you access to everything. I don't want you to have access. I'll even give you access to independence, but I don't want you to take it. I want you to come to me. So how do I represent that in a story? It's like a tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's there. You can see it. In fact, we'll say it sure looks attractive. Please don't take it. So that seems to be the point. The point is, I give access to everything I provided for you. This world is designed for Adam and Eve. This garden, you're right by my presence. You experienced me direct on. You have no shame. You have no guilt. Life is good, man. Just please don't seek independence apart from me. Come to me for wisdom. I'll give it to you. And then they do the opposite because someone outside tempts them. And she goes, okay. But the assumption is she wants to be, in fact, independent. Some of her part wants to break the rules. That's my reading of it. That's my reading. Yes, ma'am?
To me, the big problem here is that the serpent is misrepresenting God's intention. He really is representing that God doesn't have the best of intentions.
So is the major problem that the serpent is misrepresenting God's intentions? Yeah, I think so. The intentions here, like, yeah, he's not going to really kill you. That, come on, that's not his real problem. Oh, so you don't really need to trust him. He doesn't have the best intentions. Yeah, I don't. Maybe. We're just not, in my opinion, we're not told enough of why the serpent says what he is in the Hebrew masculine. He says. We don't know enough why he says that. Is it to say you're not going to be punished? Is that the point? You know him. He's good. Or is it he's really jealous that you'll be like him? That could be the point. Or is it don't trust him? That's I don't know. So that the motivation of the serpent, I don't know. I don't know. This is where okay. So you think the result is that it doesn't matter as long as you don't need to trust him. He doesn't have the best intentions for you. It's the word trust I keep being caught up on. If you said the word obey, I'm with you. Now, I think Hebrews join those together very similarly. I do. You have to trust them to obey him. Not if they're just simply your authority figure. But you do obey trustworthy authority figures, but you can obey them if you don't trust them because you're the authority. And the text so far doesn't seem to suggest that. It seems to be just you obey him. He said, don't do it. He's God, you're not. So maybe. It may be.
So this is where free will comes in.
This is where free will comes in. I think this is an evidence in the story thus far that these humans, these Adam and Eve, do have free will, what we would call free will. I do. I don't think it came into being at this point. I think it demonstrates they had it. I do. The whole time. Good. Did I see a hand? Let's just say in the church. I see that hand. Bless him, Lord. Not here though, because I'm kidding. Just joshing. All right, no good. So yeah, maybe the point is whatever he's saying is leading away from what God said, and they're not supposed to do that. Period. And we all know that, and he even warned them. I'm telling you, if you do this, here's the consequence. So when the woman saw, verse 3, this is interesting to me. The woman saw that the tree produced fruit that was, now the Hebrew, see, it was good for food, was attractive to the eye, it was desirable for making one wise. She took some of its fruit and ate it. And isn't that amazing? It didn't say, verse 6, now the woman believed the serpent. Now the woman was persuaded. Now the woman was convinced he was right. He's not mentioned at all in the motivation. Instead, she saw the fruit and goes, that's it. She also gave some of it to her husband, and that's interesting, the Hebrew word, their husband, to her man. And it probably should be translated husband, except the text doesn't say they're married. I know that's a common way, but we might think of it that way. There's no marriage ceremony, but in that sense, it is her one man. And so it's her boo. And he ate it. So I'll come back to that in a second. Verse 7, then the eyes of both of them were open. That is, they became aware, and they knew they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Now the Hebrew word for translated, I said attractive, the verse 6, attractive to the eye, ta'ava, it means desirable. And the latter term, desirable, which is a different word, nekmed, those are synonyms. So the fact is, the fruit was desirable and attractive, and desirable and desirable. They switch out. Why use two different Hebrew terms that are synonyms? Probably because those same verbal roots appear in Deuteronomy 5:21. And in 5:21, that's a prohibition against coveting. Of course, strong desires usually lead to taking. So again, the person who wrote this almost certainly is very much influenced by later Jewish texts. He's trying to, so if you're an ancient Jew, you pick up on these terms. Oh, that sounds like, oh yeah, I've been taught that in synagogue all my life, or they didn't have synagogues back then, but by my dad. And so of course they get naked. Their new moral knowledge immediately reveals guilt and shame, not freedom. So it's like, what have we done? What have we done? Sin is essentially disobedience. That's essentially what sin is. It's essentially what it is. And you can go through various Hebrew Old terms in the Old Testament, Greek terms in the New Testament. Yes, there are different nuances, but they all have the same point: is it is disobedience. One particular Hebrew word is missed the mark, and so the church loves that one. So all the sermons and topics and workbooks talk about that. That's one of the many terms for it. It can mean disobedience. It can mean rebellion. It can mean a crime, basically, because in God's law it's a crime. So all kinds of basically you're disobedient. I heard a guy yesterday. He's making his rounds around the YouTube apologist, and he's a liberal. He's a gay pastor. He's liberal. Seemed like a nice guy. And someone asked him, "How do you define sin?" And he said, "Whatever harms me, or my neighbor, or God's creation." And the guy said, "What Bible verse do you get that from?" He said, "That's just how I define it." Now, of course, and that's important. I thought, of course, that's how you define it. So therefore, when you start with that belief, then the dominoes come up. So therefore, anything whatsoever in my life that I think is not harming people, da 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 da. Of course, homosexual relationship for him doesn't harm people, and you go there. The only problem with that is, well, I mean, a few problems. So the chief one is that's not biblical. The Bible never says sin is what brings harm to my neighbor or God's creation or God. That's what, well, the best word is pagans. That's what non-Christians and non-Jews say in the world all the time. And I hear a lot of Christians say the same thing sometimes. Well, it doesn't hurt anybody. That is absolutely not biblical. I'm trying to make that, and I'll move on. Sin is not what harms people. Sin is disobedience. It does harm you, and that sin harms your relationship with God. But see, we're so pagan and narcissistic and egotistical, certainly as Americans, we think the chief arbiter of all truth and morality is us. And that's just not biblical. God is. And so it matters is what he says. And so that's what they've done. So the sense of what have we done? It doesn't mean we're physically hurt now. We harmed ourselves. Now my bones ache. But rather, they realize they have been disobedient. And it has harmed, in that sense, their relationship to their own self-perception and, of course, to God. We'll see in a second. I like how this one scholar says their eyes were open, but they discovered that they were nude, not shrewd. Their knowledge was not liberating. Instead, it produced shame that they attempted the first cover-up. That is a great way to say that. They were nude, not shrewd. So they didn't become like the snake. They became guilty and shame-driven, and they wanted to cover up their shame. So this marks a huge difference in their existence, and that is they're no longer innocent or naive. And I said this last time, and Walton says this, I think he's right, that they're not like innocent, naive children. They no longer run around naked. You know, every child is, all about your kids, but my good heavens, especially Hayden, son. Yeah, you know, just shaking. They're kids. When I do that, I get locked up. But when my child does it, it's completely normal. So they run around like kids, naked. There's no self-awareness of that. They just try their best. We try to get them to obey mom and dad. And then, but that's it. So now what happened? Adam and Eve have passed in, you might say, through adolescence, way ahead of God's schedule. They have this natural desire, like pre-adolescence has, to be independent, make their own decisions. But when they did that, they didn't gain independence to become like God. They became shame-driven. And they became sexually aware. We're naked. What are we doing? We got to cover up. It didn't give them what they were hoping for. To a degree it did. It gave them independence to a degree of autonomy. In that sense, it's like God, because God's completely autonomous and independent, sure. To a degree, yeah. But later on, God will even kind of play hide and seek with them. He still treat them like little children. Where'd you go? Adam, where are you? Why are you hiding? So, another thing to notice is the text doesn't say where Adam went. We don't have any time scale. We have no time scale. So, in the story, she could have had this conversation, and then 5 years went by, 5 seconds went by. We don't know. It just says when she goes and she sees the fruit and she eats it, then she gave him to her man. So it could be the case, and probably is the case, the assumption is Adam's there the whole time this conversation is going down. But what is very clear in the text at least, is she did no persuading. We just don't know why he didn't say something. Why didn't he say, no, we're not doing, no, I'm not eating that fruit. Dummy, don't you remember what God said? Don't do that. My own view is that we don't know, and we don't. So, and why is Eve the person who takes it? All we know is in the story is because the serpent talks to her, not Adam. My own view is that because if you're an ancient Jew, this is exactly what you would expect to happen because they thought women were the weaker sex, both in character and physically. And so I'm convinced that an ancient person, that wouldn't happen to Adam. Of course it happened to a female. Now, that doesn't answer everything because then Adam falls too. But I'd still say, yeah, but an ancient Jew would say, of course he did, because women seduce men. I'm convinced they would say that. We see that all through the book of Proverbs, which again, I think whoever wrote Proverbs and that wisdom literature is influential in this story as well. So I think the reason why a woman took it and was duped, believed it, and then didn't persuade Adam, but he did it anyway, I think would fit the average Jewish male mindset of centuries ago. In fact, many of them to this day. And most modern conservative Jews have the exact same view, just like almost every Muslim man in the world too. Some Christian men have the same view. They shouldn't, but they do. Any questions or comments about that? I'll move on. Anything? I thought that would garner some comment. No? Nothing? Raise your hand if you're by a weaker sex. He's just scratching his nose. I didn't know what that was. I just... Anyway, that's it. And again, you're going to hear messages, not from me, but from other people. Long, whole discussions about women and how this... Anyway, the point is the text is she didn't persuade anything. Adam said, okay, chunk. Things are different now. Verse 8. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of Yahweh, God, moving about in the orchard at the breezy time of the day or the cool of the day, and they hid from Yahweh God among the trees of the orchard. So now this image of him walking around, and they're hiding and seeking. Verse 9, but the Yahweh God called to the man and said, hey, where are you? And the man replied, well, I heard you moving about in the orchard or the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And then and Yahweh God said, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I command you not to eat from? And the man said, the woman whom you gave me, God's gift to man. She did it. And then I ate it. And Yahweh God said, you're right, she's the weaker sex. That's not what it says. What is this you've done? What have you done? And the woman replied, the serpent tricked me, and I ate. Notice what happens when they're held morally accountable. What do? They blame, yeah. And so, of course, that's the person's point, is that's the theology of it. Whenever you do something that sets up this kind of archetype of what humans do, we blame. What have you done? Him, her. Yeah, that's the hard thing.